Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, Hive of 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming on Power Talk, please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app to your smartphone. Stream all of our live local programming, including...
Hello.
Hey, Aron Magner, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
It's a pleasure to be on. Is this live?
Oh, we're live to we're live to the world, man.
I didn't realize that. Okay, fun.
Yo, dude. So, well, first of all, I just want to give the audience a little bit of perspective here. I didn't know this cat. I was going to Boston University. I was heading up to Burlington, Vermont, on certain sacred missions back in the late 90s, and I got a chance to see a band called the Disco Biscuits at these fraternity houses in Burlington, Vermont, and it really blew my mind open, even though the significance of music at that point for me had not evolved to what it is today. And now 20 years later, I got a chance to see my guest at Unlimited Devotion, the Wavy Gravy special in Ardmore. And, even in like contexts where the songs are meant to be short, there's a coherent beginning, middle, and an end. My guest always has something lucid to say. It always makes sense. Obviously, in a more jammed out context, we let in with Billy and the Kids from September 18th, 2015, and he can stretch out, play as many bars as he wants as well. And he's off in many new directions that we're going to get into today. Aron Magner, an honor. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you. It's awesome to be on. It's really funny because as I was on hold and I was listening to that Harder They Come, and I was like, this is sick.
Dude, it was the sickest thing I've ever seen in my life, dude. I mean,
you finished that sentence even, like that was the first time that it had processed. I was like, who is this on clav in this funky version? This is super cool. I rarely play a real clav. That was like one of the few projects where I play a real clav, and I think that was like kind of the only time that I've ever really like played that song. That was Red Rocks, right? That was like the opening performance, the opening song from Red Rocks.
I mean, I stumbled upon this a few years ago. Yeah, it was September 18th, 2015, and you're just, honestly, you're on. Everyone's on fire, but you're really on fire on this show, man. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, we, Billy and the Kids only played a handful of shows, 20 top. And I do remember that Red Rock show was one of our best for sure. I think there was like a Feel Like a Stranger from that show that was particularly good that I remember fondly.
Yeah, that was a
cool project. That was a cool project to be involved with. Everything about it was awesome.
I wanted to ask you. You're a perfect cat to ask because obviously, you still are painting on your musical palette, and you have a lot of your life left ahead of you, and a lot of creation left ahead of you. But I look at like what's going on with Dead Incorporated, Dead and Company rather. Paul Barrere called it Dead Incorporated, but like Phil Lesh, he has.
That's what it's evolving into.
It is and so my point is that like Lesh will still go on the road and will play gigs and all that stuff, but he wasn't a restaurant owner, and he invested in this place. And I've interviewed Graboff and Casal and Leone, Metzger,
Uh-huh.
Pascal, all these guys, all the West Coast cats too, and Phil brought in all these guys who, um, not so much the ones I mentioned, but really the West Coast cats. They were never hip to the Grateful Dead songbook. But the point is that he, instead of going on tour as Dead and Company are, um, he's opened up a regional space for younger cats to find their sound. And I wonder about how you feel older cats, because you've played with a lot of the graybeards, are best suited to keep the cycle of music together. Is it actually just touring, or is it about the Leshian concept of playing, of creating venues and letting younger cats come in to get comfortable with their own voice?
I mean, I have so much respect for what all of those guys are doing in playing with, a lot of people, making sure that the catalog of the Grateful Dead and the canon has its place in not only American music, but has its place in this very next generation that has the ability to, continue it, right? I mean, music is, in what that is in order for that tradition to go on. And what better people to learn that catalog from than the people that were there in the studio on the stage when those songs were, being birthed. I think that that's super neat. You're not just like learning a song from the American, canon because your father taught it to you and you play the same instrument. I mean, you're literally learning it from the source. And then, there's a bloodline that kind of can get passed along from that. And I think there's a lot to learn that can be learned by just tapping into that bloodline. It doesn't even need to be a direct, if you will. I've learned so much from playing with Billy, from the, few occasions that I've gotten to play with Bobby. But I also learned a lot from, playing with somebody like, John Kadlicek, who spent years, playing with those guys, So, that, as a direct descendant, if you will, or a disciple, there's all these different ways of really getting to understand that catalog. I think it's super cool that all these West Coast cats that Lesh plays with, didn't have that songbook. And, I think that it opens up, and even, non-West Coast cats, right? You have, John Scofield.
Grayboff.
John Scofield.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
All those left of center people, that it's interesting to see what their musical contributions can be as well. For me, I've always, my entire life, I got into the Grateful Dead at a very precocious age, and I've always been extremely passionate about the music. But I never really played any Grateful Dead music. I mean, even just, tinkering around on the piano, I never really played Grateful Dead music until I started playing with Billy. I knew all the songs, they were all in my head somewhere, almost every single one of them, but I'd never actually translated that onto the piano. So what a cool experience it was, to have my first experience of playing Grateful Dead music, to be with members of the Grateful Dead.
I mean, if there's one thing that you could point to that you learned from Billy, not obviously musically, but I mean, just from a point of view of like artistic creation, or I'm curious about just even like the idea of how much rehearsal. I mean, Garcia hated the R word, and I'm just wondering like what was one of the things that you still carry today, being a disciple of I mean, there's no drummer that I listen to or that my daughters. I mean, I inundate both of my daughters with early '80s live Grateful Dead because you can't really get them.
Good for you.
Oh yeah, heavy early '80s, like very urgent, almost desperate, driving off a ledge. But I mean, Billy's driving that whole thing, and so what? If there was one thing that you can say that you carry with you, maybe from a vibe or an ethereal point of view from that you learned from Billy, what would it be?
I think to be in the moment. I think that was and I always knew that, right? I mean, at the heart of what, we do as the Disco Biscuits or in Spaga and all that stuff, it's to be in the moment. That's what improvisational music is, It's not about what had previously happened or even where you're going. It's nice to have somewhat of a roadmap, but it's about being present in what's going and being coherent of where you're going. But, to be able to get lost in it, where you stop thinking about that and become fully zen is actually
I love it, dude.
Right?
Yeah, I
it's
love
a hard
it, dude.
thing to do. There's other people that are on stage with you, God knows what they're thinking. God knows what they think you're thinking, and then you can easily get in your head about it, and you can easily get in your head about, we're, 5 BPMs too fast, or we're in an entirely different key. How are we going to get there? But if you have, faith in what you're doing conceptually, if you have faith in the high level of conversation, musical conversation that's happening with your bandmates, you can definitely get there. And that ability to kind of get lost in that moment and not care about any of that other stuff is what Billy excelled at, And I mean, there were numerous times where we did rehearse. We rehearsed a bunch of times with Billy and the kids before performances. And part of it was getting Billy warm again, right?
right.
Before, Billy and the kids kind of started, right before GD50, so they weren't even having, those rehearsals yet. So part of it was, man, I love that song. What's the name of it again? And you can't be more in the moment than that, man.
I mean, I guess to this day, like, is that something that, I mean, at 41, I often look at my generation and younger and say, I mean, sometimes it's very evident on the bandstand, especially if it's more of a formula trip kind of show, where that's the biggest issue, is that people are not in the moment. You can feel them, they have to wrap up a solo quickly because that's what they think they're supposed to do and then move on to the next song. And I just want to get the your manifesto as it relates to how you've actually learned to stay in the moment, because I mean, obviously that was not something that just occurred when you started to work with Billy. He just happens to take it to the nth degree. But how have you learned over time to actually just essentially leave your thinking mind at the side of the stage?
It's something you got to practice. It really is. I've got no tricks. Sometimes reminding yourself, to just be present and be in the moment. Sometimes, have you ever done any of those like meditation apps that it kind of walks you through? If a thought comes into your head, just let it be a thought and let it flow out.
Sure,
You don't need to be upset that a thought came through your head. It's kind of like that, right? It's like I close my eyes a lot, for better or for worse. I don't look up at the audience a lot, unfortunately, for better or for worse, and that's when I know. I mean, sometimes 45 minutes will pass, and I'll look up and I'll be like, oh, my God, there's a lot of people out here.
I dig, man.
And I feel like I need to get better at that, actually, at, not just engaging with the crowd, but, I can get lost in music pretty easy, and that's good. And sometimes I can't, but, I need to be able to look up and engage and know that I've got an audience in front of me and know that the audience is listening and having a good time. And it helps to have that symbiotic relationship that, always happens anyway with a band and a crowd, to acknowledge the fact that there's a crowd out there, even if it's just me acknowledging them. I don't need to be jumping around and getting everybody hyped, but it is something that I remind myself about a lot, because I know that is something that I do when I get lost in music, because I look down and my eyes closed, everything like that. And I noticed recently, I caught like one of the Fish webcasts, and I noticed that Trey had on his on either side of his monitors, "Look up" in all capital letters and an exclamation mark. And I was like, huh. So it's not just me. It helps to have just little subtle reminders of things all the time, right?
I mean, I it's just so funny, because I totally dig what you're saying. I mean, to me, even when I first saw you and I didn't know your name in the basements of these fraternity houses, and I mean, music at that point to me was, I don't exactly know how to put it into words, but it was definitely more of a social situation than it was a healing situation. And I actually have no problem with you guys not making eye contact, because I actually believe that one of the things, a lot of the times, Michael Shreve, it's funny you brought up the Woodstock 50 thing, but, one of the interviews I did with him, he said, how do you expect the audience to go there if you don't go there first? Essentially raising the collective consciousness of the entire group, and
Yeah.
I look at it and I say, I think that I understand what he's saying, but at the same time, I bring a fourth quarter Philadelphia, just to use an analogy, I know you're a Philadelphia cat. Philadelphia Eagles down 10-7, and it's Reggie White on the, blitzing off the back end. I mean, that's the mentality that I bring to the show. And I want to, and I have people sometimes saying, anyway, what I'm saying is it's as much imperative as on the audience to bring that burning desire. I guess what Trey's trying to say is don't, make sure that you connect with the audience. Don't leave them out. Look up, make eye contact, I guess. But to me, it's like, it's all about healing. It's all about discarga, and it's all about raising the collective consciousness of the group. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's more to the point of saying what's in your head at that time. If you're really just completely immersed in the music, or if you are conscious or if you're just a little bit too maybe aware of things on stage that maybe aren't that big a deal. But I would say, to be honest with you, I think the audience isn't. I wonder, actually, here's the question: how have we gotten to a point? Because you definitely are a fusion of a street scholar and somebody who did come out of the academy. But we have a situation now where the younger generation is really, we've learned to sit and stare at facility as opposed to letting the body dance. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about how you think we got to that point and what we need to do as a collective community and as a civilization in order to grow musical vocabulary. And I can't tell you how many times people come up to me at bars that are half filled, and they tap me on the shoulder and they say, oh, you're blocking my view. It's like, music is made for dancing, man. I know you play for a lot of dance band crowds, but I'm just saying in general. In a lot of improvisational settings, we've really become taught to sit and stare at facility. And I just kind of want you to riff any way you want on that.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, you say music is meant for dancing, and, certain types of music are meant for dancing, and that definitely can engage a crowd more. But, some music is meant for thinking. And as we'll segue at some point later in this conversation into, this new Spaga project that I have. But what's interesting is, and I'm not saying that Spaga is more cerebral music than other types, and you need to, really sit down and listen to it. But we're playing both types of rooms, right? And we're playing to different types of crowds. And, we don't have that many shows under our belt just yet, so we don't even have, many things to be able to compare and contrast to. But what's interesting is some of the rooms that we played, like the first two public performances that we played in New Orleans earlier in April, was a standing room, and both shows were sold out, and people were hooting and hollering and dancing, and it took me by surprise. I was not expecting that type of vibe.
I love hearing this stuff. This is great.
And then you compare that to last month we were at Rochester International Jazz Festival, which draws, by the way, like a crazy amount of people to the city of Rochester for a jazz festival. It was crazy, but it was the room that we played at that festival was a sitting room, and people were just as engaged as they were in New Orleans, but they definitely weren't dancing. There were some people off to the side that were dancing, and it was interesting that they had the chutzpah, for lack of a better word, to dance in a room that clearly wasn't meant to be, it wasn't meant to have dancing in. It was meant for a sitting room. And we're playing like some performing arts centers, We're playing some clubs. We're playing some festivals where, there'll be the hardcore DJs on before or after us. So it's kind of interesting as we find, like, what our fit is going to be, to have that juxtaposition of those two types of rooms.
Can you talk about how you came up with the genesis for this project, the Spaga project?
Sure. I mean, it kind of came about from friends and other musicians kind of like challenging me, if you will, to do a solo project, a solo album. And I guess at the time, I do a lot of stuff here in my home studio with, my computer, and got my piano and synths and everything like that set up. And I have a lot of ideas, and I'm really good at ideas, but I'm not good at finishing the ideas. And I got to a point where there was this one idea that became more and more fleshed out that was a little bit more on the jazzier side. And what I noticed is every time I sit down at my piano, even just to tinker around, usually what comes out naturally is some sort of improvisation rooted in some form of jazz, whatever jazz is, right? And then it begs the question of what is jazz and all that type of stuff. But, that type of sound coming out of my piano. And I grew up studying jazz and then quickly discontinued my studies when I, met the Disco Biscuits in my late teens and kind of never really looked back since. But it's always been so. When I had this one song, which on the album is now called Colors, that was kind of the genesis of like, well, maybe this is the first song for, an album that those friends and other musicians were saying, dude, you should totally do a solo album. And that was the kind of the genesis for it. And then once I understood that, okay, maybe I'll do kind of like a jazzier side of me and reconnect to that person that I once was 25 years ago, which is also super interesting that, like, not only has this project reconnected me to my first instrument, but it has also reconnected me to a person who I once was, and continued down that path with no real, no pressure of a timeline, no pressure of what I wanted it to be. It was just kind of writing for the sake of writing and playing music for the sake of playing music. And then, like all things that kind of naturally form and naturally evolve, I decided that I wanted to bring in an upright bass player and try to make it into a trio, which is I brought Jason Fredicelli into the fold immediately, and then he introduced me to Matt Scarano. We didn't audition any other drummer. It was just like, okay, this feels like a good fit. We went into the studio. We demoed a couple of the songs that I had at the time, and there was definitively an aha moment, one of those like, oh, this is going to be more than just I have a really good upright bass player and a phenomenal drummer available to me to play these songs and, help evolve them into a studio recording. These are musicians that understand the ethos of improvisation in the same way that, Bill Kreutzmann does or the Disco Biscuits do. That same level of improvisation that exists in the jam band world clearly exists in the jazz world. And now maybe I can fuse those elements together using these jazz musicians. And there was definitively that moment where I was like, okay, this is going to be cool. And then just kind of like ran with it again with, no pressure of a timeline, and had access to a local studio here. And I decided that there was this other theme that was going on of keeping everything kind of local, think locally, act globally, all that type. And I kind of ran with it and then started forming this idea of this Spaga brand, if you will. And now as we begin our next series of shows, I mean, we're still discovering our collective voice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be
out, who we are.
I mean, just for the audience listening around the world, let's put in a tune here, and then we'll come back and analyze it. All right?
Sounds fun.
Music on the Jake Feinberg Show, brought to you by Butch Diggs and Diggs Dental, Craig Pretzinger of Allstate Insurance, and Abbott Taylor Jewelers. And we thank them for their support so we can play urgent, burning music like that for the composer, Aron Magner. I just wanted to ask you, that was the song entitled Colors off this album, Spaga. And when I've done 4 interviews with Johnny McLaughlin, and he was talking about when he was listening to Coltrane, it took him a year to figure out what he was doing on Love Supreme, on the album Love Supreme. And what really he said that Train was doing was co-joining the spiritualism and jazz. And forgetting the labels for a minute, I just want to get the Magner philosophy on how to create spiritual music in the studio or on the bandstand.
I feel like it's easier to create it on the bandstand than it is in the studio, right? In the studio, you're trying to capture the same magic that exists when you're on stage, except in a very sterile environment. And that can sometimes make it difficult. It's helpful if you have somebody, a producer, an engineer, who kind of acts as like a therapist of, engagement. That person is usually your only audience anyway, and your only person for feedback. So you're kind of playing to them. Not necessarily for their approval. You're doing it for your approval, but you're not, you don't have an objective point of view while you're playing with headphones on, and there's nobody else to feed energy off of. So it's definitely a different environment. You're trying to capture lightning in a bottle in a studio, and sometimes what that takes is perseverance of playing the song over and over again to be able to tap into something in some sort of like unknown dimension where you played that line, you played that song the exact same way 17 different times, but something about the way that you just did it, everybody knows that's it. It taps into your true being. That is finally revealed, as opposed to, it's one thing to, play something, you didn't fumble over a lick, you played it well, your fretting was good, whatever it is, but sometimes it doesn't have your personality written in code into what you just played, and sometimes it takes numerous times of doing it until finally it gets there. And that was one of the things that I discovered about this project in the studio, especially since we didn't know what the overall personality of the project was yet. You know,
right.
I didn't even understand that this was like an expression of my personality. I was just like, cool. I have these songs. I got these other cool musicians, and I've got this studio available. Let me try and see what can come out of it. And a lot of these songs kind of evolved in the studio too. I came in with much more than just the blueprint, but it's really hard to know what it's going to sound like without the expression of the other musician's personality into it. So these songs obviously organically took a turn for the better as they were formed in the studio. And then a lot of the songs have a long, drawn-out stretch of improvisation where there's a starting point and an ending point, but who knows what's going to happen. And Colors was a great example of that. There's two different movements there where it just kind of opens up into whatever, and it caps with a certain lick. And that's how we know that, we're going into the next section. But what comes previous to that was anybody's guess. And playing it, I don't know how many different times we did that take, 10, 12 times. You also kind of lose perspective of, they all have different cool qualities to them. So which one do you want to go with? And then you get into the next stage where, okay, now we're done recording. Now we have to go back and listen. And what story story the most that we just told? Is it take number 3? Was that a cool journey? Was it take number 7? Which did some other things. They weren't the cool parts that I liked about take number 3. And then you kind of just need to pick one and go for it. And that becomes, that becomes the record, right? I mean, that's what a record is. It's a recording of a definitive moment in time, and it's sealed. It's a sealed document. This is what happened on this day in 2018, and now you're going to listen to what happened on that day in 2018 a year later because it's finally out. It's recording. Yeah.
I'm curious about the idea of anybody that I've talked to, could be Dennis Coffey from Motown and the Funk Brothers. I mean, some of these guys, a lot of the times they would go in the studio and, I mean, they had an hour to cut one tune. I mean, do you feel like one of the things that you are trying to work on is, I don't know, I mean, you don't want to put out something that you're not proud of and that that you don't feel exemplifies what the tune is about and the meaning of the tune. But to a man, every studio cat that I've ever interviewed, they always say the best takes are the first or the second take. I mean, don't you feel like the losing perspective after 17 takes is? I mean, I understand. And also, so it's two questions. I mean, were all the tunes like a lot of takes? And then number 2, like with these guys, this trio, Jason and Matt, I mean, did you take sort of the Gene Page, Barry White approach where, you come in with, chord changes, maybe a little bit of a feel and that's it? Or was it very, or were there no chord charts, or were there any sheet music at all? I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is like how much improvisation and how much, sort of just after the first take, were there any tunes that you were just like, yeah, that's one reason it's great to have a producer there too. But I mean, was there any of those kinds of moments in the recording session?
So you're definitely right that take number 1 or take number 2 is typically the purest of the takes, right? Because then you just kind of become like a, caricature of yourself.
Exactly.
A mockery of yourself, trying to repeat, right? And there's a terminology for that, and it's called demo love, right? And we suffered with that with the track Creed. So it was one of the first tracks that I brought to the band. It's definitely one of the easier tunes to teach, and doesn't require a chart. Just requires here's how this section goes, this section, and then here's how this section goes. And we demoed it, and then kind of shelved it for a little bit as we were working on the other songs and recorded a couple of other songs. And I knew that Creed was going to be the easiest one, so could come back to it whenever we decided to come back to it. We had a bunch of different studio times over the course of several different months. And what we found is that not only did, I have demo love, but there's a reason that exists. It's like you cannot go back, right?
I love that line. I never heard that before. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it is definitely a thing.
Oh,
you can't capture the magic that was once there. You're now just trying to like I said before, recreate lightning in a bottle. So I mean, we tried everything, man. We did all of the studio tricks, and again, it is such a simple song, right? So there was nothing difficult about the technique of what was being played, or needing to rewrite sections or something like that. But we tried, okay, let's go in and re-overdub the bass. That's definitely the problem. The bass isn't, locked up to the groove. Okay, maybe that wasn't the problem. Okay, now let's just redo the bass and the drums so that we have a groove that's locked to each other, and then I'll come in a separate room and I'll do my lines, because none of them are complex and they don't need to be part of like that groove. And that didn't work. And I mean, we really ripped it apart, coming in with different types of overdubs. Let's do it on a synth bass instead of a regular bass, all these things. And what ended up happening is we went back to the demo. And then we just, which, and the unfortunate part about the demo is that it wasn't set up for recording.
Right,
It
right. But it was
set
the
up
best. It was the most
couple
burning one.
of
Yeah.
mics
No.
in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I
let's
mean, that's fine. I
capture
mean, that's the
vibe.
way. But I mean, it wasn't perfectly set up. But let's be fair. Some of the greatest records that we love, that's the way the mics were.
Two mics in a room.
Exactly.
Yep, that's it, for sure.
That's it.
100%. Or even back to the old days when it would just be like everybody singing around one microphone.
Exactly.
You know?
I mean, that's I sort of feel like. I mean, so I mean, how hard was it for you to say we got to do that? That's the one with the best feel. Was it hard for you to do that because it wasn't perfectly mic'd?
I had to go through the whole process of trying to, recapture what was originally there in the first place, in order to add to that. So, that's what we did. We did a little bit of overdubs, not much overdubs on the album, but Creed definitely has some so that we could thicken up the sound a little bit from what was a little bit of a thin demo type vibe. I mean, though we EQ'd it out, I mean, there's one point where you can hear an email come in into my computer.
That is. I mean, see, that's taking it to a new extreme. But I'll have to vet that tune. We have a game, Aaron. We have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I want you to pay attention to who you think this might be, but more importantly, pay attention to the content, and then we'll come back and break it down.
Yeah, wait.
You see, so African civilizations, they've lasted longer than any other civilizations in the history of the world. Over 10,000 years of history of Africa. You see. But Africa was on the top, and what's going on top, Mother Nature brings down to the bottom, you see. So we suffered, what happened to Africa, but in the very beginning, we had thousands of years of civilization coming out of ancient Nile Valley, coming out of ancient Egypt, the black people of Africa, everything from music to monarchy to food, you name it, you see. So when you get involved with the ancients, and in this country, the oldest people, my father always told me, be around the old people. He said they may have not been to school, but they have wisdom. They remember when the African people were united, going back to slavery days and going back to Africa itself, So I was so blessed because I had people in the neighborhood. My father hung out with Max Roach, and so many. My mom, they were deep into African culture, and they lived that way. They didn't talk about it. They lived it. Mom and Pop would bring music in the house. Could be all kinds of music. Not like today. You hear the blues, the jazz, the black church on Sunday, opera. That's where we all grew up like that, see. So I wanted to find out where this came from. And my father always said, you got to go to Africa. You got to go all the way back. You better understand me and your mom. You better understand what happened to civilization, At the same time, we were taken away, but that was part of the plan, part of the master plan. And what's so ironic, wherever we've been taken, we create some original music.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's Brazil or Cuba or Venezuela, Puerto Rico or Mississippi, whatever, So when you look on that level, because the one thing I learned, Mother Nature's in charge of what's going on,
You want to take a guess at who that is?
I do not, but I want to know.
That was the late, great Randy Weston from October 2014, my radio interview with him. And Aaron, I wanted to ask you, as it relates to Spaga, or quite honestly, anything that you put your heart and soul into, I mean, to me, we talked, one of the issues with labels and music is that you ask somebody, what is jazz? You said that earlier, and then there's you get 20 different answers on what that means. But there's something about that music that there's an adherence to the blues, diaspora, and the motherland of Africa. And being that you're from the bastion of Philadelphia, I wonder how close you've gotten, aside from maybe actually going to the motherland, which I'm assuming you probably haven't, but how have you tried to integrate the roots of jazz into your music?
I don't know how much I've deliberately tried to integrate the roots of jazz into my music. I feel like jazz was the first music that I was introduced to when I was, a student. That I was like, oh yeah, this is why I like playing music. I always liked playing music, right? My next door neighbor was like, the neighborhood piano teacher, and I definitely took to it more so than the rest of the neighborhood kids did. But I never really, dedicated myself to it until a teacher in my early teens introduced me to jazz, and that's when I got it. And then I, got another teacher from there, and had this passion, and then the Disco Biscuits and yada yada. But that connection that I've had to play, and it's the way that I play Grateful Dead music, has a little bit of a jazz tinge to it, without getting too jazzy, right? I'm not doing crazy show-offy jazz things.
No.
It's just like it's part of my expression. It's part of my personality. It's part of my voice. But I want to make this clear. I'm not like a jazz guy. Like, that's the interesting part, I'm not a jazzer, or whatever the expression would be. I mean, I can't hang with these, amazing musicians that dedicate themselves fully to jazz, that are just incredible. And there's a lot of them out there, and most of them we don't even know what their names are.
Right.
But they're incredible jazz musicians. I do not consider myself one of those. And I think I heard an interview with Bruce Hornsby where, and he's done albums with like Jack DeJohnette, and he's done jazz albums. He's played with, these amazing, jazzers. And I think he described himself as a friend of jazz, and that's how I would liken myself. I have always identified with it. I've always appreciated it. It's seeped into my music and, any project that I play with. But I feel like I'm more of a friend of jazz than anything else.
Well, I mean, I think it's very well articulated. I mean, with Spaga, as you guys begin to road test these songs, first of all, I also want to say, like, I would be dancing in the front row of your concerts. That's very danceable music, what we listened to before. Colors.
It happens, man. It's super interesting.
I know. It's going to blow your mind. I mean, I know why there's. Yeah, I mean, because there's emotion in it. I mean, that's the point. Is that the amount of times that I've talked to guys like rest in peace and Ndugu Chancellor, these guys, and like, they're like watching some jazzer on stage at a drum clinic, and he's just playing out of his mind for 25 minutes, and the dude next to Ndugu looks over, and Ndugu's sleeping because there's no feel, because there's no emotion to it. And I mean, if that's that's the conundrum. I don't think maybe you're saying you don't have the facility or the vocabulary to be a quote unquote jazzer, but believe you me, I mean, there were plenty of cats who had no academic schooling, had their own type of feel, and they were able to fit into any kind of jazz, any kind of musical context. But my question is that as you road test this album, do you believe that you'll never play the same song the same way once?
Oh, definitely. I mean, what's the fun in that?
See, that's jazz to me. That's jazz. That really is the ultimate improvisation, where you're never playing the same song the same. I mean, I remember Garcia talking about an interview about conversation he had with Pete Townsend, and he's like, and the Who had been playing the same exact show for 5 years, and Jerry's like, man, that's a burn, man, that's a burn. So it's just like,
right,
it's like, I mean, but how does that work? I mean, obviously, when you pegged these cats for Spaga, you understood that they had that ability to be able to essentially never play the same song the same way once. And then once you get on the bandstand, that sort of, I mean, if you can take me through that process, because that to me is the magic of music.
Yeah, I mean, these guys come from that type of background where, like, we'll follow you for the changes and try and keep up, that type of thing. But, it's to keep themselves on their toes, to keep, the audience on their toes, to keep, the trio continually engaged. Yeah, no song is ever played, the same way twice. And here's a perfect example. There's a song that didn't make it on the album that I've been saying in live performances will be one of the first songs on the next album, right? And it's called "For the Table," and it opens up just with one repeated note in a rhythmic pattern, and then the song kind of develops from there. And it's a kind of like a second line type of song. It's a little riffy. It's not like the other Spaga tunes. It's a little more straight ahead, not
Sure.
straight ahead jazz.
Sure.
But, it's groovy. It's groovy. It's got a lick. It doesn't do that much exploring. And because it starts off with just one note, and sometimes I'll play that note from inside the piano, and sometimes I'll play that note in this octave range or in that octave range or in both octaves. And it was the second set at Rochester Jazz Festival the other month, and we had the song in the first set, and it was a different show, so it was fine, different audience, and started playing those notes, and then all of a sudden, like in my right hand, a chord progression just happened. Wasn't thinking about it. Didn't know what it was going to sound like. I played one chord, which then led my fingers or my brain, whichever it was, to play the next chord, and then a third and a fourth chord that followed. And that kind of led for an immediate inspiration. And,
Dude, I love this. No, that's Brent Midland at his finest right there, man. That's unreal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for me, that just played the same song literally an hour and a half prior.
Mm-hmm.
A huge smile forms. I don't know what's about to happen, but it sounds really pretty, and it's never happened before. How is the band, how is the trio going to react to it? Because they have to have a reaction, and of course they do. And that to me became like the highlight of the show, just that something can exist in the moment, and just that one moment, and as it turns out, there were people that were there for both ticketed shows, so it's kind of like the tree fell in the woods and actually did make a sound.
Exactly. No, that's right. Well, if they
were able to identify how different those, two versions of that same introduction of a song were.
This is interesting. One reason I also played I don't even know why I played the Weston quote. I mean, other than I just found him to be just such a deep cat. But, you talk about think globally, act locally, or whatever that phrase is, and there is a food component to it, to this whole operation, if I'm correct. And I mean, I dig that, and I think that I mean, there's nobody who loves food more, good food more than me, but I'm curious about how that integrates with the burning quality or cats like me who could potentially show up at one of these barns with grass-fed beef and people are there, sort of in a looking or have expectations to have a listening concert. And then on top of that with food, the expectation is to, like discover new flavors, and that might go with the music. But how has that worked? Have you actually had any test runs with the food component, or is that that first one coming up? I mean, I'm curious about that whole fusion, where that idea came from.
I would love to talk about it because it's definitely one of my
go ahead.
favorite things about the genesis of this project. So when it came time to actually announce to the world that I have this project and, we're working on an album and I want to, say that this exists and this is what it's called, right? As opposed to just putting up a post, or even, just randomly releasing a single.
It's brilliant. Like, hey, very smart. Yeah, I dig.
And I'm playing at this, club down the street, next month. You should come. I wanted it to make a sound, right? Have some sort of impact, other than just announcing that it exists. And what I started seeing as I was doing it in the local studio, and what I started seeing when I, tapped into local Philadelphia musicians and that whole thing, was that what we were doing was kind of like a farm-to-table production, musical production, right? Everything was kind of local. My wife, who's an optometrist, figured out how to make a website My lawyer friend who lives down the street from me and is a amateur photographer, took our very first
this is
picture of
unbelievable.
the vegetables and the food. So I was seeing like this whole farm to table album production, and that's what kind of got me thinking about the similarities between this farm to table production and food, right? And there's so much that hasn't been explored about those two things, yet they're very deeply intertwined.
Explain to the audience how. That's very interesting.
Chefs listen to their favorite bands while they're preparing the meals of the day.
Dig.
So what type of cool restaurants I'm going to go to, what chefs have those restaurants. I know what I'm looking forward to when I go to a lot of different cities. Restaurants curate different playlists specifically to have their patrons listen to it, consciously or not, while they're eating their food. There's, relationships that have been formed, a lot of like, Bourdain and Iggy Pop and stuff like that. There's kind of like, the chef and the rock star can definitely like go hand in hand. Both are artists,
Dig.
but you've never really, you never really have these two mediums in the same place deliberately. They kind of like live side by side with each other really nicely, but they're never explored as one. And so my concept originally was, what if I can, pair food that pairs with the music, right? This saga music is both beautiful and random at the same time. Can I find those two qualities in a food dish?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess I can, but then I realized if I wanted to do something cool and pair food and music, that I think the most important element was that I find the chef that understood the concept of what we were trying to do, of pairing these two things, as opposed to making sure that his food, matched the music in whatever descriptors that I wanted. So kind of interesting. The engineer, my right-hand man, my co-producer on the album, his name is Will Marr, and he has some sort of background in mass produce. And I would come into the studio and he would tell me a story about the 2,000 pounds of zucchini that, he just brought to auction last week or something like that. And it was kind of like, it was cool, and I'm interested in food, and, he talked to me about it, and started working for a friend on the friend's family's farm, and he would come in with stories and show me pictures and talk to me about this barn that was on the farm that was built in the 1600s, and the structure of the barn was built in the 1600s, and they just started doing small little dinners there for the local community. And that's what spawned the idea of, what if I debut this project by bringing in a grand piano into a barn, which doesn't really go well together. It's like, what is that grand piano doing inside of a barn? But somehow works as well. Both things are so, both a barn and a grand piano are so. When
the RCO All-Stars were recording at Levon's barn, Mac Rebenak had an upright piano in there, would tell stories to Bones Malone all night. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all.
There you go.
Yeah,
there you
brilliant,
go. Well, I guess if you need space as a band, that's a great place to have space for sure. And maybe there was a little bit of like, Levon's barn that was somewhere in my head that I just
subconscious
wasn't able
thing.
to
Yeah,
actually,
definitely.
Verbalize.
Yeah,
right. But I thought like, what a cool place to actually like debut this material for the first time and just test it. Right. We hadn't played in front of an audience yet. We hadn't done anything outside of the studio yet, and tapped into this Philadelphia celebrity chef named Yehuda Sichel. And he's the executive chef at a restaurant called Abe Fisher, and I pitched him the idea. We followed each other on Twitter. That was it. And I, reached out to him, and I was like, hey, I've got a crazy idea. Can we connect and, talk to him on the phone? And there was no more convincing that needed to be done. He was like, I'm in. This is awesome. So that's how the project debuted, and that was last October. And all the ingredients, all the vegetables that are used in the meal are grown on the farm. and he prepares everything there, and then we bring in, tables and chairs and the grand piano, and it's set up, and we have the two art forms mutually exclusive of each other. So first comes the meal, and then comes the performance, as opposed to like a dinner theater type of vibe.
Oh, okay.
And
I did. So you roll. The cats are going to have a full belly before the gig.
Yeah, and what I learned after last year, as I was kind of like debriefing with myself and figuring out, what felt so special about that night was the food was incredible. The music was really good, and there was a proud moment of us doing it for the very first time and having it be successful. Everybody was happy, but it was like the gestalt of all of those. We were standing on land that has nutrients in it that literally made the food that you just ate. And all of these elements combined, the sacred aspect of the farm, this beautiful antique barn that we were playing in, really cool music being played for an audience for the very first time, and a chef doing something out of his wheelhouse, and with a smile on his face, preparing a meal for that many people, a four-course meal for that many people. The everything about that became the art. It was the event that was the art, not one of the individual, food or music or whatever. It was the whole gestalt of it all that became so special. And wanted to repeat it again. And everybody was immediately on board. There was no convincing, so we're doing it again on September 15th. It's in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour south of Philadelphia.
We're definitely going to have to do part two because there's a lot that I'm just having a ball here. But I wanted to ask you, looking back on those early years, talking to younger cats especially, being a road dog and playing the upholstered sewers and the frat houses with the Disco Biscuits. I mean, can you talk about the calling that you had for music and how illogical, I don't even know if that's the right word, but the dedication, because there's no guarantee that your art's going to pay for your life. But if you really are so can you talk about your intentions for getting into music and how much of being a road dog has really foundationally grounded you for anything that comes up today that might try to shake you to your core?
Well, I don't know. My answer might be different than other people that feel it.
Yeah, no, this is your interview. Yeah,
right. For me, and I went to college. I went to a University of Pennsylvania, and good college, and tried to find something that interested me as much as music, and couldn't. And I jumped around from department to department. And nothing, it wasn't even as if there was nothing that interested me as much as music. It was like nothing spoke to me even remotely. And it got to the point where the university was like, hey, you need to choose a major. Like, you are literally the last person in your entire class to choose a major.
What was it, like junior year? When did they tell you that? When did they say that?
Yeah, something like that. Probably end of my sophomore year, beginning of my junior year, whatever it was. And I remember sitting down with a friend in West Philly, and he was like, dude, who are you fooling? Like, you live, eat, breathe, and sleep music. So why would you want to do anything else? And I was like, well, the music department at the University of Pennsylvania is, a little bit more legit history and, theory and stuff like that. And I kind of want to have like more of an electronic, computer department or jazz department, which is something. And he was like, whatever, man, it's music. Like, you'll learn something and you'll be able to bring it over to what, your passion is as a subgenre, within music. And that kind of spoke volumes to me, and I declared music as my major and started taking all those, legit theory, history classes and everything. And then the Disco Biscuits, who were already a band, did our first tour, and my professors were cool enough with me being able to make up my classes while I was on the road or figure something out because I was doing music and they were music professors, even though they weren't like cool music professors. They were still music professors. And by the time my senior year rolled around, the Biscuits had a tour that was booked. And it was either like I go back to school or I go on tour.
Wow, I love it. This is so
go on tour.
Wow.
And not go back.
You did. Wait, you did
so
not.
that
Wait, hold on.
was
You did, I just want to be clear because Eddie Henderson, the trumpet player with M1D, with Herbie, he had his medical degree in psychiatry and he graduated.
Oh wow, I did not know that.
No, this is a great story. I mean, I mean, basically, Billy Hart was like, because Woody Shaw was leaving the group, and Billy's like, Eddie, I mean, if you really, I'm sure you could get the gig if you wanted to try out for it. And Eddie's like, no, I already hit on Herbie for the gig. I got the gig. And Billy's like, you did what? He's like, you're walking away from this medical secure career to take to make $300 a week to play this spiritual music. Eddie's like, yeah, why not? I mean, and so it was anyway, you did not graduate at that time. You went on tour.
I didn't. I dropped out of an Ivy League school
wow.
in good standing, and kind of didn't look back. Now, I definitely have the very cliched dreams about it, showing up to a class and, having them say that there's, a final exam and I've got no idea even what the topic is, forgetting my locker combination. Like, these dreams are very trite and cliched and they definitely do haunt me. And every now and again I'll say something to my wife about wanting to complete school. And she was like, okay, why?
Yeah, right. I mean, I got to be honest with you, man. I think it's just, anyway, can I ask you that, how was at that time, did you even recognize that the insecure path was the secure path for you? Because 99 out of 100 people would never do that.
No, I was following a passion, right? Like, I really enjoyed what we were doing at the time with the Disco Biscuits. I had no idea how long it would last for. I had no care how long it would last for. It was just what we were doing was cool. It was growing. I was young and there were opportunities of going out on the road and exploring and seeing all these new places and meeting all these new people, that I certainly wouldn't have otherwise. And, the road kind of just sucked me in, and the adventures to have on a road while we were, exploring our sound and developing our sound and putting in new music and, refining who we were as a band and all of those things. And, I'm still dedicated to it for all of those reasons that I dedicated myself to it 20 some odd years ago.
You have a large touring schedule coming up. Can you just talk about, in your mind, the last time I saw you I was in the upper deck at the Ardmore Music Hall for Unlimited Devotion with Wavy, and I just wanted you to talk about, the cats I saw you on stage with, Leslie Mendelsohn, Reed Mathis. I think Kimmock might have been on stage, actually, now that I think about it. You guys are playing the American Beauty album. But what does the musical community mean to Aron Magner today in terms of what it can do for people that are not musicians, and then ultimately things like Spaga that might birth new communities? I mean, how much of that? Because I mean, you're not you're not hung up on GPA or data or quantified stuff. Like, is it all unquantifiable to you? And how important are musical communities today for you?
Well, I'm very aware that the community that, has formed as a result of the Disco Biscuits is what enables me to continue the job that I have and the career that I have. The support that the Disco Biscuits community provides in all of their loyalty and rabidness of everything that is Disco Biscuits is what enables me to explore other territories of my personality, with this Spaga project. So I'm very aware of the community and the culture that is formed as a result of music, and specifically in my case with the Disco Biscuits. I find one of the most fascinating things about that is not just the community, but the butterfly effect that is caused within that. Of how many relationships have been formed, how many marriages have been formed, how many babies have been born as a direct result of, coming to a Disco Biscuit show and meeting new friends for life, and meeting your spouse,
Right. Interesting.
Putting out new children into the world that would not have necessarily existed had, those two people not met at a Disco Biscuits concert. I mean, the stories are, voluminous. How many of those, businesses that have formed, enterprises that came about from being at a Disco Biscuit show and having that eureka, aha idea while being at a Disco Biscuit show. I mean,
I love it, man.
Seriously.
I know, I do. Listen, man, you lived it. I'm just laughing because I know it's true, man. It's unreal.
Message, my 20 friends that I know are here in the concert somewhere spread out throughout the venue, and have them be able to text message, the group back. This was before group texting, and then that happened at a Disco Biscuits concert. And then there became an app that was formed called GroupMe, and it sold to IBM for God knows how much money. These things happen as a result of the Disco Biscuits and the community that we have. So that's super cool.
Well, Aron Magner, I hope I get a chance to get back to the East Coast. Or are you planning any West Coast trips with any of your contingents in the rest of this calendar year?
No, but I know that there are people that live on the West Coast. And I know that there are people that live on the West Coast that really, really want, the Disco Biscuits, or members of the Disco Biscuits, or all of those things combined, to come out to the region of the country that they live in.
Yes.
And I want to say, I hear you, and I agree, and I promise. I don't know whether it will be this year, but I promise that we will get out there and we'll start hitting these other territories that we haven't gotten.
Yeah, I mean, dude, I live in Tucson. Just do a Tucson Phoenix Flagstaff run. I mean, you're all set after that.
I would love nothing more. So I don't understand. You live in Tucson, but you were in Ardmore the other month?
Dude, I over the summer, I had an opportunity I was in 7 different states. I mean, I was at Ardmore. I did a Facebook Live with Wavy at his son and daughter-in-law's house, and then I watched that whole show. I mean, the coolest thing about it, mainly through Kevin Calabro, I've connected with so many cats from the Royal Potato family, and it's so cool because for so many, I've done thousands of radio interviews, and most of them are with the Graybeards, and to be able to connect with my peer group is so invigorating, because I realize that the cycle of music will continue, and it's really invigorating for me, and because you guys are all really authentic cats and pretty grounded, and also totally willing to go off the deep end, and that's what it's about, man. So yeah, I was all over the place this summer, and so there's a chance I'll be back on the East Coast, but I really need to drag you out here for a hang,
Well, I mean, you continue preaching the gospel, and I'll come. I definitely thank you for your support and, helping to get these stories out of all the people that I do see on your webpage. I think that's super neat.
Well, also, I sent you a friend request on Facebook because I'll be transcribing a lot of these excerpts, some of the most salient stuff you've said today, and be blasting them out on new media. So that's where I do most of my tentacles are way out there. So, but yeah, let's stay in touch, man. It was great. It was great to hang with you.
Most certainly a great conversation. Thank you.
Keep it up, man.
Alrighty.
Later. Peace. Great hang with Aron Magner. His new album, Spaga, is now available, and he'll be taking that to a barn near you. Thanks to Kevin Calabro for his support. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you later.
is a puppet or a slave. So as sure as the sun gonna shine, I'm gonna get my share of what's mine. Because the harder they go, the harder they fall. Wanna you know? The harder they go, the harder they fall. Wanna know? The harder they go, the harder they fall.